First of all, a big thank you for the invite and the opportunity to discuss with you our market and macro outlook. If I had to pick a headline to describe the outlook, I would go for yes, but. Yes, but because, yes, there are quite a few pieces of good news when we look at the economy, and there are definitely a few, I underscore this point. But for every piece of good news, there seems to be a qualifying statement, hence a but. And we see this even when we look at the performance year to date. Yes, we've had a really strong start in terms of equity markets. Globally, we're talking of an increase of about 10% since the start of the year. But we've also seen a much more muted performance in government bond. Obviously, all of us are less interested in what has happened so far, and they want to see how the story will continue for the rest of the year and even beyond. So let's start that journey, so to speak, by looking at the macro outlook, and specifically economic growth. And once again, this is going to be a case of yes, but. And let me start with the yes, the good news. Growth has proven much more resilient than many commentators would have expected at the beginning of this year. And we have a number of examples. Employment, to quote something that is very often referenced, or indicators such as PMI for services, but also for manufacturing. And let me be clear, the story of economic resilience is not just a US story. We have seen, for example, a rebound in manufacturing in Europe. But, I told you, the but would come. But we have witnessed also the fastest and largest increase in rates globally this century. And we know that the impact of monetary policy acts with a lag. Therefore, it is absolutely crucial to continue to monitor the economy for potential signs of distress. Signs of distress in corporate bankruptcies, for example, or in delinquency in credit card space. The impact of monetary policy tightening also remains very much center stage given the inflation outlook. And when we talk about inflation, yes, it's again a story of yes, but. The yes is that inflation has been moderating, and moderating significantly. So let's take the Eurozone as an example. We've moved from an inflation rate that was in excess of 10% to the latest reading of about 2.4. But, and that's a significant but, it remains above the 2% mark. And this is very much something that we see across the board. I mentioned the Eurozone, but obviously the US is another great example. When we think about inflation going forward, our central scenario for the US, as an example, is that inflation will be in the range of 2.5 to 3% on average over the medium to long term. And this is on the back of structural mega forces, such as, for example, the rewiring of global supply chains, as well as an aging demographics that, other things being equal, will reduce the supply of labor. Just for clarity, whenever I talk about mega forces, I'm basically talking of structural phenomena that have a lasting impact on the market and the economies of the medium to long term. Let me be clear as well, not all mega forces are necessarily inflationary in nature. Notably, AI is a good example of a potentially deflationary megaforce. And of course, nowadays, nobody can actually do a speech on the market or the macro without mentioning AI within the first 5 minutes, especially somebody like me who was also a professor of AI at the University of Cambridge. When we look at AI specifically, AI is productivity enhancing, and as such is likely to be more deflationary in nature. But to get a sense of what we are actually talking about, it's good to reference some of the academic studies that have been done in this space. As an example, there was a great paper published in Science last July with a title which is a bit of a mouthful, if I'm honest, Experimental Evidence on the Productivity Effects of Generative Artificial Intelligence. This paper found that for mid-level professional writing tasks, access to generative AI tools such as ChatGPT increased productivity significantly. I think the decrease in completion time was something like 40%, and also the increase in quality was something in the region of 18%. What was also quite interesting in the study is that the biggest delta, the biggest improvement in productivity was experienced by individuals that were less skilled at the writing task. And the intuition behind this is actually quite simple. Many of you play chess. Can I have a show of hands? Anybody in the audience that play chess? Okay. So for all the chess players out there, obviously the better a chess player you are, the less benefit you get from getting a chess AI agent to help you. But if you are a particularly weak chess player, the help of an agent, a chess-playing agent, will obviously give you much more of an edge. The same applies to tasks like the one studied in this science study. So we're going back to the economic impact of AI. While medium to long term, AI is likely to be productivity enhancing, and this is good news in terms of the structural impact on inflation, in the near term, and this is the but and the less good news, its impact may be less pronounced given the adoption curve and the CapEx expenses that are required. What does this inflation picture imply for our outlook for monetary policy globally? Given our central scenario of structurally higher inflation, we felt that the market consensus coming into this year was too aggressive in pricing way too many rate cuts. And this is why, across the board, we tended to keep our portfolios with relatively short duration. However, the current market expectations for both the Federal Reserve and the ECB are more reasonable and much more in line with economic fundamental. So going back to my yes, but, yes, and the good news is we will see rate cuts globally, but rates will stay higher than the level that we have experienced post a global financial crisis for about a decade. What does this macro picture that I've just sketched imply for our views of market and asset allocation? Let me start again with the good news, the yes. The macro backdrop, which is characterized by resilient growth and falling interest rates, represent actually a good backdrop for risk assets in general. But the good macro story is already largely reflected in valuation. So if we compare the valuation for risk assets vis-à-vis their own history or the risk-free rate, there is really no bargain out there. Far from it. So as an example, if we look at developed market equities, currently traded on a PE of 18.5 versus an average of about 16.6. So all consider, how do we position portfolios tactically? Well, we continue to favor equities on the back of the resilient growth story, and within equities, we see values in areas such as emerging market or small caps. Small cap, for instance, trade at a significant discount, about 10% discount vis-à-vis their own history, as well as large cap. And this is despite quite a solid earnings outlook. So it's expected that in aggregate, earnings growth will be something in the region of 18% year over year. We also continue to be constructive on US equities, and this is on the back of the AI-related investment cycle. And similarly, US dollar-denominated emerging market debt is an area that offers attractive valuation compared to other segments of the fixed income space, such as high yield. And we also continue to favor areas like private credit on both valuation as well as structural consideration related to the mega forces like the future of finance. So this is all about how individuals, companies save, borrow, and transact. But tactical positions aside, given the outlook of yes, but, which effectively means significant uncertainty, the most important considerations are the following: diversify and be dynamic. Now, I appreciate that when I mention those two things, it must sound as exciting as watching paint dry. But sometimes the smartest thing to do may also be the most boring. Thank you.
Thank you. Simona, we'll just keep you there for a second. If anyone in the audience has a question, then please do raise your hand and we'll see if we can answer it. You spoke there, Simona, about continued uncertainty. We heard from Robert Amsterdam earlier about geopolitical uncertainty. There's a lot going on at the moment, and you touched on dynamism and diversification there in building portfolios, but can you say a little bit more about how you position yourself to sort of prepare for that uncertainty, to deal with it?
Absolutely. So it's clear that the geopolitical uncertainty is likely to create a more sort of volatile investing environment. And this makes aspects like diversification much more relevant. And it's important to really look at diversification through many lenses. This is about diversifying not just across asset classes, not just across geographies or sectors. Really look under the hood of the investment that one makes. And I think this is increasingly important to ensure that one has true diversification in portfolios. When it comes to dynamism, this is all about having the right governance structure, but also the right instrument to be able to act very promptly. So governance structure would mean the ability to move portfolios, take decisions quite quickly, and then implement them quite quickly. And it's important to prepare for such matters in periods of relatively low market volatility, because that's the best time to ask ourselves the question, do we have the right toolkit to really help us make the decision and implement this decision quite quickly? In the spirit of my yes but and also my optimistic nature at heart, I also want to emphasize that volatility is not just about challenges, although in most languages that I'm aware of, volatility tends to have a negative connotation, but volatility may also create opportunities. So I think it's important to think about this being prepared and having all of the tools in the toolkit also as a way of capturing opportunities. One way where we sort of concretely do this is through scenario analysis. We run a lot of different scenario analysis on a variety of things. They could be geopolitical events, it could be economic events, it could be market-related events. And the whole purpose of doing this is actually to be prepared. Because by doing scenario analysis, it forces you to think, what would I do in the portfolio if something happens? And as the English saying goes, being prepared is half the battle.
Very good. We do have time for a question if anyone would like to ask one, but I certainly have at least one more. And one about AI, if we can. Of course, it's perhaps the biggest topic at the moment that captures so much interest for investors, but it has the capacity to transform the global economy. I think everyone agrees that and sees that. But as someone who works in industry but also has an academic background, do you have a particular perspective on it?
So it's very interesting, if I wear my academic hat, to see how much excitement we've seen about AI and how new this all sort of is portrayed, when in reality artificial intelligence as an academic discipline has been around since the 1950s. And if you actually look at some of the early experiments in AI, where you see a little mouse that needs to escape a maze, there is actually a lot more in common with even the more modern system from a underlying maths point of view. So what has really changed is the availability of compute and also the availability of data. So as we think about the adoption challenge, which is also what's going to really impact from an economic point of view over the medium to long term, availability of good quality, a substantial amount of data is going to be absolutely critical. So data is like the fuel for AI, and so it's absolutely critical to think about the data and the data infrastructure. The other aspect is skills. And when I talk about skills, this isn't just about, obviously, the skills and the knowledge of the specific AI, generative AI, particular tools that are being released, important as that might be, but it's also the skills that are necessary to actually work effectively with AI. So one of the aspects that is put sort of even more the spotlight on is actually critical thinking. Because the more complex the models that we are dealing with, the more important it is to have the critical thinking to actually look at the output and ask ourselves the question, does it make sense?
Every time a new technology comes along, there are some people who think it will remove jobs from the economy. And every time it seems to be that people find something else to do, some other way they can use their labor. But with this shift, it seems like a different kind of shift from the ones that we've seen in the past. Is there a danger that this time there really will be less and less for human beings to do, that the economy will actually transform in a fundamental way?
I mean, as I said earlier, AI is productivity enhancing and will evolve the way we consume and we work. It's also important not to look at AI as effectively an isolated technology. Whenever we look at technological progress in history, it's always the case that it's never one technology alone. So let's look at another period to draw a comparison, which was like this latter part of the 19th century, which is usually seen as another period of very fast and rapid technological change. Even there, it was advances in things such as railway, steel, and steam that sort of combined led to the significant technological progress. So if we really want to examine what is the likely impact on the economy, and as such also on employment, inflation, etc., it's important to really look at AI not in isolation. And other technologies that are very relevant for this particular type of analysis is robotics. So what can AI together with robotics do in terms of the level of automation? But also things such as 3D printing, which will also be relevant in the context of interplay with AI. So I think the reality is that when we are thinking about the economic impact of AI, we really need to look at a broader picture and not to jump to sort of any quick conclusion.
Fair enough. We have just a moment if anyone has a question before we move on to our next panel. If not, we'll keep running. A good speech, Simona Paravani-Mellinghoff of BlackRock. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.